We were rivals. Then we got stuck in a tiny, single-room cabin. Julian looked at the chartered bus and felt a familiar, heavy wave of dread. He sat in seat 4B, knees pressed against the hard plastic of the seat in front of him. He was clutching his noise-canceling headphones like a life raft in a stormy sea. This was the annual department retreat. 3 days in a damp cabin with 50 undergraduates and the entire faculty. To Julian, this wasn't just annoying, it was a minefield. He wasn't good at small talk. He liked a library because it was the one place where silence was the rule, not the exception. Is this seat taken? Or are you saving it for a ghost? Julian jumped. He hadn't heard anyone approach. The voice was bright, textured, and terrifyingly close. He slid his glasses up the bridge of his nose, a nervous tick he couldn't shake, and looked up. Nora. She was standing in the aisle, wrestling with a duffel bag that looked big enough to hold a body. Her hair was a problem, a mass of copper curls that seemed to defy gravity. She was wearing a bright yellow raincoat that made Julian's eyes hurt. No. It's open, Julian mumbled, quickly pulling his legs in to give her space. She swung the bag into the overhead bin with a grunt, then collapsed into the seat next to him. She smelled like rain and fake cherry candy. You look thrilled, Julian, she said, buckling her seatbelt. Try to contain your excitement. You might scare the freshmen. I'm just conserving energy, he lied, gripping a stack of papers on his lap. I have grading to do. Grading? Julian, we'll go to the woods. Nature. Bears. She nudged his arm with her elbow. And besides, you need to rest up. If you want to beat me for that tenure track spot, you need to be at the top of your game. Julian stiffened. There it was. The elephant in the room. Or rather, the elephant on the bus. I plan to earn that spot based on my research, Nora, he said stiffly. Not my ability to roast marshmallows. Nora laughed. It was a loud, unself-conscious sound that turned heads 3 rows back. Relax, Professor, she teased. I want to beat you fair and square. I don't want you passing out from exhaustion before the finish line. I won't pass out, he muttered, opening a red pen. I'm just focused. You're so quiet. She pulled out her phone and plugged in wired earbuds. She didn't sit still. She tapped her foot. She hummed along to whatever she was listening to, a low, buzzing sound. It wasn't that she was trying to be annoying. It was just that she occupied so much space. She was radiant, loud, and confident. Everything he wasn't. She was the sun, and he was a guy who preferred the shade. Julian sighed, put on his headphones, and stared out the window. It was going to be a long 3 hours. The camp was muddy, the air was cold, and the staff cabin was a closet with a roof. Oh, Julian said, standing in the doorway. His voice went small. There was one bunk bed, bare mattresses, no privacy curtain. Looks cozy, Nora said, pushing past him. She threw her bag onto the top bunk. I call top. I kick in my sleep. Julian stood by the door, holding the handle of his rolling suitcase. He felt the panic rising in his chest. Forced proximity with his direct competition. I requested a single, he said. I have sleep apnea sometimes. I toss and turn. I'm going to keep you awake. I sleep like the dead, Nora called down, already unpacking. She started stringing up battery-operated fairy lights. Just think of it as a slumber party. We can gossip about the department head's toupee. Julian exhaled slowly. He placed his suitcase in the corner, trying to take up as little room as possible. He took out his toiletries bag and set it tentatively on the edge of the tiny sink. I'll try to stay out of your way, he murmured. Nora looked at him from the ladder. She softened just a little. Julian, relax. I don't bite, unless there's tenure involved. He offered a weak, nervous smile. Right. Day 1 was the trust-building exercise. This involved the faculty and instructors putting on harnesses and climbing 40 feet into the air. Julian was terrified, not just of the height, but of the people watching. He hated being perceived. He stood at the base of the tower, checking his carabiner for the 5th time because it gave him something to look at besides the crowd. "You look like you're going to the gallows," Nora said, appearing beside him. She was wearing athletic leggings and a tank top. She slapped his shoulder. "Relax. The cable holds 2 tons. "I know," Julian muttered, staring at his shoes. "It's just everyone is watching." "Hey, everyone," Nora shouted to the group of 20 freshmen. "Julian is going to demonstrate the panic grip. Watch closely." The students laughed. Julian felt the heat creep up his neck, turning his ears a bright red. He wanted the ground to open up. "Please don't," he whispered, miserable. "Hey." She leaned in close. Her voice dropped, stripping away the performance. "I'm kidding. You're fine. Just look at me, okay? Don't look at them." He looked at her. Her hazel eyes were bright and surprisingly kind. "Okay," he breathed. They went up. Nora scrambled up the cargo net effortlessly. Julian moved methodically, hand over hand, trying to control his breathing. When they reached the top platform, they had to clip onto the zipline. Nora fumbled with her clip. The angle was awkward, and her hands were shaking slightly from the climb. "Hold on," Julian said. He stepped closer on the small wooden platform. He wasn't doing it to correct her. He was doing it to help. He reached out, his hands covering hers. "It's stuck," he said quietly. "Here, let me." For a second, the crowd below didn't matter. He was close. His chest brushed her arm. He manipulated the lock mechanism with deft, gentle fingers. Click. Secure. He tugged on it once to check. "Safe," he said. He looked up. Nora was staring at him. Her teasing smile was gone. She looked surprised. "Thanks," she said. "Don't die," he mumbled, stepping back quickly to give her space. "It would look bad on my performance review." He jumped first. He didn't scream. He just closed his eyes and endured it, landing with a clumsy thud in the sawdust. Nora followed, whooping the whole way down. The cabin felt impossibly intimate at night. They had established a changing protocol. One person went into the bathroom, while the other changed in the main room. Julian came out of the bathroom in his pajamas, plaid flannel pants, and a worn gray t-shirt. He stopped dead. Nora was sitting on the edge of the bottom bunk. She was wearing a t-shirt that was 3 sizes too big, slipping off one shoulder, and tiny shorts. She was applying lotion to her legs. The smell of vanilla filled the room. Julian averted his eyes immediately, staring at a knot in the wood paneling, clutching his toothbrush like a weapon. I'm going to sleep," he stammered. "You're such a grandpa," Nora said, capping the lotion. "It's barely 9. I'm tired. The hiking. The people." He climbed into the bottom bunk. He lay on his back, stiff as a board, pulling the blanket up to his chin. Nora climbed up the ladder. The whole frame shook. "Good night, Julian," she called down. Her voice was warm. "Try not to dream about spreadsheets." "Good night, Nora." Silence settled, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was loud. He could hear her shifting above him. The mattress springs creaked. He could hear her breathing. Then her hand flopped over the side of the top bunk, dangling down into his field of vision. "Julian, why ya? Do you think a bear could get in here?" "The door is locked, Nora. Bears are smart. I saw a documentary. They can open car doors." "We are in a car. Go to sleep." "Fine." She pulled her hand back up. Julian let out a shaky breath. He turned onto his side, facing the wall. He squeezed his eyes shut. He could still smell the vanilla. He hated that he liked it. Day 2 at lunch. The mess hall was a cacophony of metal trays and shouting students. Julian was trying to eat a sandwich in peace at the end of the staff table, hoping no one would talk to him. Nora stood up on a bench. She clinked a spoon against her glass. "Announcements," she yelled. The room quieted down. She had that gift, commanding attention without fear. "Capture the flag tonight at dusk," she said. "Red team meets by the lake. Blue team meets by the latrines. Sorry, blue team." Laughter. "Also," she continued, a wicked glint entering her eyes. She pointed a finger down the table. "It is a little-known fact that Instructor Julian was once a thumb wrestling champion in middle school." Every head turned to Julian. He froze mid-chew. That was a lie. A complete fabrication. "He has challenged the winner of Capture the Flag to a duel," Nora shouted. "Winner gets his dessert for the rest of the trip." The students cheered. Julian! Julian! Julian slowly lowered his sandwich. He looked at Nora. She was beaming at him, practically vibrating with mischief. He felt the blush start at his collar and burn its way up to his hairline. He wanted to melt into the floor. He hated this. But looking at her face, so alive, so delighted, he couldn't find the energy to be angry. He was just overwhelmed. He gave a small, resigned wave to the students. They roared. Nora hopped down from the bench and slid into the seat next to him. "You're welcome," she whispered. "I just made you the most popular guy in camp." "I'm going to hide in the woods," he murmured, burying his face in his hands. "You wouldn't dare. You'd miss the Esmores." She stole a chip off his plate. He let her. It was 2 a.m. on the second night. A cold front had moved in, dropping the temperature into the low 40s. The cabin had zero insulation. Julian was awake. He was freezing. "Julian," the whisper drifted down from the ceiling. "Yes, I can't feel my toes. I think frostbite is setting in. I'm going to lose a pinky." He sighed softly. "I told you to bring the thermal sleeping bag, Nora. I thought the list was a suggestion, like Best By dates." A pause. Then the sound of rustling. "I'm coming down. Nora, wait." She didn't listen. She dropped from the top bunk, landing lightly on the floor. She was wrapped in a thin fleece blanket, shivering so hard her teeth were actually clicking. "Move over," she whispered. "This is a twin bed, and I am a compact person." "Scoot." Julian hesitated. He could hear the cold in her voice. He scooted back, pressing his spine against the freezing wall, making a narrow space on the edge of the mattress. She climbed in. She curled into a tight ball at the foot of the bed. "I don't need to cuddle," she said, her voice shaking. "I just need to be in a heat radius that supports life." Julian sat up. He reached over and took his glasses off, placing them on the nightstand. He reached down to the end of the bed and grabbed his spare wool blanket. He tossed it over her. "Here," he said gently. She pulled it up to her chin. "Thanks." They lay in silence for a few minutes. The shivering didn't stop. The bed frame vibrated with it. Julian agonized over what to do. He was awkward. He didn't initiate touch, but she was freezing. "Nora, why yeah. You're really shaking. Come here." She hesitated, then scooted backward until her back was pressed against his chest. Julian froze for a second, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then, he slowly draped his arm over her waist, pulling her flush against him to share the warmth. She felt tiny and cold. "Better?" he asked, his voice low and rough with sleep. "Yeah," she breathed. She stopped shivering. "You're warm." "High metabolism," he muttered. "You know," she whispered. "You're different at night. You don't stutter." "I'm just tired," he deflected. "And it's dark. No one is watching." "I'm here. You don't count." She turned her head, slightly on the pillow. "Excuse me. I mean," he took a breath. "I don't feel like I have to hide around you. You already know I'm awkward. You've seen the worst of it. It's relaxing." Nora went quiet. She reached down and rested her hand over his arm, the one wrapped around her waist. Her fingers traced the veins in his forearm. "I don't think you're awkward," she whispered into the dark. "I think you're just observant. You notice things other people miss." Julian tightened his hold on her, just a fraction. "Go to sleep, Nora." "Okay. Good night, Julian." She fell asleep within minutes. Julian stayed awake for an hour, hyper-aware of her breathing, and the fact that the girl who terrified him, his rival, was currently asleep against his chest. The storm hit on the third night. The rain started hard and didn't stop. It turned the dirt paths into mudslides. Then the head count came up short. A freshman named Leo was missing. Panic started to bubble in the room. The lead professor was pacing, wringing his hands. Julian stood up. The social anxiety that usually paralyzed him didn't apply here. This wasn't small talk. This was a problem to solve. He walked to the wall map. "Nora," he said. He didn't shout, but his tone was steady. She was at his side instantly. "I saw him near the North Trail," she said, her voice tight. He was looking for a signal. "North Trail loops back to the ravine," Julian said, tracing the line with his finger. "If he went off path, he's here." He tapped a ridge line. "It's rocky. If he slipped, he could be stuck." "I'll drive the Jeep," Nora said, grabbing the keys. "You navigate." They walked out into the rain. In the Jeep, Julian read the map by the light of his phone, calling out directions. "Left at the fork. The mud is deep here." Nora drove with terrifying precision. She trusted his directions implicitly. He trusted her driving completely. They abandoned the Jeep at the trailhead and ran. Julian had the flashlight and the first aid kit. Nora had the intuition. He wouldn't have gone up, she shouted over the wind. He's scared of heights. I saw him freak out on the ropes course. The limestone caves, Julian nodded. This way. They moved as a unit. Julian cleared the branches. Nora scanned the ground. They found him 20 minutes later. Leo was huddled under a rock shelf, shivering. Julian handled the medical check, efficient, calm, reassuring. He splinted the ankle with practiced, gentle hands. Nora handled the emotions, cracking a joke, getting the kid to laugh. They got him back to camp. As the paramedics took Leo, Julian and Nora stood by the muddy wheel of the Jeep. They were soaked. They looked at each other. They were breathing hard. For the first time, Julian didn't look away. He held her gaze. The staff cabin was quiet compared to the chaos outside. The rain was a relentless, rhythmic drumbeat on the tin roof, sealing them inside a private world. They stripped off their soaked coats and kicked off muddy boots by the door. The air in the room was damp and cold, but the heat radiating off them, pure, high-grade adrenaline, made the small space feel pressurized. Nora ran a towel over her wet hair, shivering slightly. She looked at Julian. He was wiping his glasses on a dry corner of his t-shirt, his movements slower than usual. Without the lenses, his eyes looked darker, unguarded. He put them back on and looked at her. He didn't say anything about protocol. He didn't check his watch. He just exhaled a long, shaky sound that matched the way Nora's hands were trembling. "We need to decompress," Nora announced. Her voice was steady, but her fingers fumbled with the zipper of her duffel bag. "We need dry clothes," Julian corrected softly. "And sleep." "No, we need this." She pulled it up to her chin, a bottle of red wine. It wasn't expensive, but right now, it looked like liquid gold. Julian stared at it. "Nora, that is a direct violation of the staff conduct policy. Section 4, paragraph B. No alcohol in student proximity. The students are in their cabins, traumatized by the weather," she said, cracking the seal with a sharp snap. "Leo is safe. We are alive. And I am freezing. Are you going to report me, Professor?" She challenged him with a look, holding the bottle out. Julian looked at the bottle. Then he looked at her, with hair plastered to her forehead, cheeks flushed from the cold and the run, eyes bright and defiant. He walked over to his nightstand. He picked up his insulated travel mug. He dumped out the cold dregs of his morning tea into the sink and held the empty mug out to her. "Pour," he said. Nora grinned. It was a dazzling, victorious thing. They settled on the floor, sitting on the braided rug between the bed and the wall, bathed in the soft, warm glow of the fairy lights. Julian sat with his back against the bed frame, one leg drawn up. Nora sat cross-legged facing him, their knees inches apart. "You were terrifying out there," Nora said quietly, passing the bottle back and forth. "I was just following the map." "No, you weren't." She leaned forward. "You took charge. You ordered me around. You splinted that ankle like you were a field medic. It was—" She paused, searching for the word. "Competent." Julian felt the heat rise in his neck. It wasn't shame. It was pleasure. "I don't hate you, you know," Julian said suddenly. The wine had loosened something in his chest. Nora smiled softly. She traced the rim of the travel mug with her finger. "I know. You just hate chaos." "I thought I did." He adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit that Nora now found endearing. "But tonight the chaos made sense. Because you were there." Nora's breath hitched. She looked down at the mug in her hands. "I know I'm a lot," she whispered, her voice losing its usual bravado. "I talk too much. I take up too much space. I probably drove you crazy this weekend." Julian frowned. He reached out and tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. "You don't drive me crazy," he said fiercely. "You fill the silence. I hate the silence, Nora. I just didn't realize it until you broke it." Nora's eyes widened. "Really? Really? You make me brave," he whispered. The air in the room shifted. The playfulness evaporated, replaced by a gravitational pull so strong it made Nora dizzy. She shifted forward. Her knee bumped his. He didn't pull away. "You aren't scared of anything," she whispered. She reached out, her hand hovering, then landing softly on his forearm. "You just need a reason to be loud." Julian looked at her hand on his arm. "Nora," he warned softly, It sounded like a plea. What? If you keep looking at me like that, I'm going to break another rule. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. She moved her hand up his arm until her fingers brushed the pulse point of his neck. Break it. She dared him. Julian leaned in, but Nora put a hand on his chest. Wait, she whispered. She reached up with trembling fingers and gently slid the glasses off his face, setting them on the floor. She looked into his dark, unfocused eyes. There you are, she breathed. No barriers. Julian groaned, a low vibration. He reached out and tangled his hand in her drying curls, pulling her forward. He kissed her. It tasted like cheap wine and rain. It started slow, a question asked and answered, but then Nora made a small sound in her throat, and his restraint snapped. He shifted, pulling her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her waist like bands of iron. Nora, he murmured against her mouth. Don't stop, she whispered. Please don't stop. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Are you sure? Because if we do this, I'm not going to be able to pretend I don't want you tomorrow. Good, she said, pulling his shirt up. I'm tired of pretending. The rain pounded on the roof, but inside, the only sound was the friction of skin on skin and the soft, ragged breaths of two rivals finally surrendering to the gravity between them. Daylight brought reality. The rain stopped. The sun hit the frosted window. They woke up tangled together in the bottom bunk. It was warm. It was perfect. Then, a sharp sound pierced the air. The lead professor's whistle. Right outside the door. Julian's eyes flew open. The whistle. That's the 7 a.m. wake-up. Nora scrambled up, hitting her head on the top bunk frame. The wine bottle. The fairy lights, Julian hissed, rolling out of bed and grabbing his glasses from the floor. For 3 minutes, it was absolute chaos. Nora shoved the empty wine bottle deep into her laundry bag. Julian ripped down the fairy lights, stuffing them into his suitcase. They smoothed the sheets. They threw on their staff shirts. When they opened the cabin door to greet the groggy students, they weren't lovers. They were breathless, slightly disheveled colleagues, standing 3 feet apart. Good morning, Julian said, his voice cracking. Coffee, Nora announced, refusing to look at him. Now, they didn't talk about it on the bus ride back. They didn't have a "what are we" conversation. They didn't set rules. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was heavy with secrets. Julian sat next to her, headphones on, but his hand was resting on his thigh, pinky finger hooked around hers in the space between the seats where no one could see. Back on campus, the fall semester ground on. To the outside world, nothing had changed. They were still competing for the same job, but in the spaces between, everything had. It was in the coffee. It was a Tuesday morning. 8 a.m. Nora burst into the department office. Late as usual, hair wild. I need caffeine or I will commit a felony, she announced. She dropped her bag at her desk. There, sitting on her coaster, was a large cup from the campus cafe. Oat milk. 2 pumps of vanilla. Extra hot. She paused. She looked across the room. Julian was at his desk, red pen in hand, grading. He didn't look up. He didn't smile. But Nora saw the way his jaw tightened, just slightly, as she took a sip and hummed in appreciation. It was in the grading dates. They started spending Friday nights at his apartment. It was cleaner than hers, quiet. This student cites Wikipedia. Nora groaned, falling back onto the rug. Tell me I can fail him. You can't fail him for bad sources. You have to fail him for the argument, Julian said without looking up. You're so rigid. She rolled onto her stomach, looking at him. Do you ever just break a rule for fun? Julian looked at her. He reached out and ran a hand down her spine, his touch possessive and familiar now. I'm sleeping with the competition, he said quietly. That's breaking a rule. Nora smiled, leaning into his touch. We're dating. We're eating Thai food on my rug at 9 p.m. on a Friday, he said, his eyes darkening slightly as he pulled her closer. Call it what you want. He leaned down and kissed her, slow and lazy, tasting of pad thai and promise. The rivalry for the tenure-track position was heating up. Enter Derek. Derek was a third-year grad student who wore suits to casual events and was loud, schmoozy, and dismissive. The department mixer was at the campus pub. The air smelled of stale beer. Nora was standing near the bar, nursing a drink. Julian was in the corner, pretending to examine a flyer. Derek cornered Nora. He was 3 drinks in. So, Nora, Derek said, leaning too close. I heard your thesis got approved. Cue topic. Very niche. It's not niche, Derek. It's focused, she said, taking a step back. Sure. He grinned. Why don't we go back to my place? I have some top-shelf scotch. I'm good, thanks. Come on, don't be like that. He laughed, glancing toward the corner. What? Are you waiting for the mute over there? Julian? Please. Guy probably hyperventilates if a girl looks at him for too long. Nora's eyes flashed. Shut up, Derek. He's 10 times the academic you are. She turned to leave. Derek reached out and grabbed her arm. Not gently. Hey, I'm talking to you. Don't be a... Julian had been watching. He noticed a shift in Nora's posture. He saw Derek invade her space. When Derek's hand closed around her arm, something in Julian snapped. The fear of crowds vanished, replaced by a singular need to protect her. He moved. He walked with purpose. He crossed the crowded room, weaving through the professors. Derek. It wasn't shout. It was a statement. Julian stepped into the circle. He didn't look at the floor. He looked Derek dead in the eye. He reached out and deliberately, firmly, shoved Derek's hand off Nora's arm. Then he stepped in. He placed his body between Nora and Derek. He shielded her. She said no, Julian said. His voice was calm. It was absolute. Back off, Julian said. Now. The pub went silent. The quietest man in the department had just silenced the loudest. Derek blinked, stunned. He looked at Julian, seeing the hard set of his jaw. The arrogance evaporated. Right. Whatever, Derek muttered. Just joking around. He turned and scurried away. The tension held for 3 seconds. Then, the adrenaline began to fade. Julian realized the entire Department of History was staring at him. His shoulders slumped. The confident posture collapsed inward. He took a half-step back. He adjusted his glasses, looking frantically at the floor. He cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly. Sorry. That was probably unprofessional. He turned to bolt. Nora wasn't having it. She reached out and grabbed his hand. She didn't whisper. She interlaced their fingers, holding his hand up. Don't apologize, she said, her voice clear. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes dancing. She squeezed his hand. That, she said, was incredibly hot. Julian looked at her. He looked at their joined hands. Then he looked at the room. He took a breath. He squeezed her hand back. Okay, he whispered. They stopped hiding after that. There was no point. The secret was out. They became the power couple of the department. Nora brought the energy. Julian brought the order. A month later, they were in the library. They were sitting across from each other. Nora was highlighting a text. Julian was typing on his laptop. Nora looked around. The coast was clear. She slid her foot out of her sneaker and nudged his calf. Then she walked her toes up his denim-clad leg. Julian didn't stop typing. He didn't look up. He just smirked. He adjusted his glasses with one hand, and with his feet, he caught her foot between his ankles, trapping her there. He looked up over the rim of his laptop. His dark eyes locked onto hers. Focus, Professor, he mouthed, or I'll tell the tenure committee you're afraid of bears. Nora laughed aloud, shattering the library silence. She didn't care who heard. She had the bear, and she had the guy. And as for the tenure track, they were still competing. The interview process was next month. May the best historian win, Nora whispered, nudging his leg again. I intend to, Julian replied, a smile playing on his lips. They went back to work. 2 rivals, 2 partners, and a wager they both intended to win.